If you ever come across a door in the middle of the sea, leave it the hell alone. Whenever I'm visiting my parents, I usually set aside at least a day solely for some deep sea fishing. I don't know, it's become something of a tradition, and I really enjoy the quiet feeling of being out there all alone. Now, my father's boat isn't made for rough seas, it's only a 14-footer, but if you know your way around and the weather holds up, it'll take you where you want just fine. It was a clear autumn morning when I set out. No clouds, barely any wind, and I was really looking forward to just chilling out there on the deep blue. Catch me some fish and just enjoy being alive, you know. I usually frequented no more than 3 spots, all nice and quiet, i.e. no ferry traffic, where I'd experienced some good fishing before. It took me about 40 minutes to get to the first spot, just a ways out from the old lighthouse, and I immediately set up my chair and leaned back with my fishing rod. I wasn't expecting a massive haul, but I had never left that spot empty-handed before that day. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes before I started tiring. And that's when I saw them. Goddamn harbor porpoises. Don't get me wrong, they're wonderful creatures, but when you see them you know there's not gonna be any fish around for miles. Spot number 2 it was then. I hadn't been there for years, and it required a little bit of fine maneuvering between the rocks, but it wasn't anything I hadn't done before. The weather was still fine, but the wind was picking up slightly. It took me yet another 40 minutes to get there, but it was worth it. You could see the far peninsula from that particular spot, a truly beautiful place, beloved by the tourists. I sat there idly for about an hour before I realized something was up. It shouldn't take this long to catch anything. I stood up and looked around, and quickly noticed something bobbing up and down in the water, just barely noticeable over the waves. Shite me. A harbor seal. Yet another sure sign there'd be no fish for miles. Those shitheads, I mean lovely creatures, are even worse than the porpoises. Excellent hunters, hated by all fishermen. I shouted at it in frustration and started the engine yet again. I wasn't giving up yet, I still had the third and final spot to explore. It had been maybe 3 years since I last was there, and for good reason. It wasn't an easy place to find, nor to maneuver to. It took me an hour. Way too long. But I had to be extra cautious. I used to know every hidden rock, every hazardous stretch by heart, but I was rusty. I was almost there when the unthinkable happened. I hit something, and hit it hard. I wasn't even going that fast, but the impact nearly threw me overboard. When I finally came to my senses, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a door. Not a floating door, like debris, or anything, but a solidly rooted wooden door, horizontal in the water. It was painted a clear white and had a finely adorned frame. The handle was one of those curved ones with like a gargoyle figure at the end of it. It looked like something out of a Gothic mansion or something, and I stood there just staring at it for minutes. I just couldn't figure out what to make of it. Should I call someone? Mark it down on the map? In the end I did the only thing that made sense, I kicked it carefully. Just a few light taps with the boot to begin with, then harder, until I finally stomped down on it with all my might. It didn't budge. Whatever it wasn't going anywhere. So I did it. Now, listen carefully, if you ever come across anything remotely similar, don't be a jackass. Don't be stupid. Don't be like me. Don't fucking open it, is what I'm trying to say. I had to get the oars out and align the boat with the door to get a hold of the handle, and with some amount of force I was able to yank the thing open. I don't know if you've watched any of those movies where they open like a long-lost tomb, but it was exactly like that. A gust of wind threw the thing open, and there was a strange whooshing noise, like you'd hear in a depressurizing chamber or something. Cautiously I peered over the side of the boat into the gaping hole below. I couldn't really see much, except for the stairs leading down. Stairs. Straight down. Into the abyss. Second warning, if you ever open a door in the middle of the sea, don't be a goddamn idiot. Don't be a moron. Don't be like me. Don't go down the stairs, is what I'm getting at. There was an emergency backpack on the boat. My dad wouldn't let me out without it. It wasn't much. A couple of bottles of water, some canned food, a flashlight, matches, a change of clothes. But it was enough. I would love to say that I really pondered hard. That I considered all possible outcomes. But I didn't. I was, like previously outlined, a moron. I tied the boat to the door handle as best I could, and yanked it a couple of times to make sure it would hold. Then I climbed out of the boat, and started descending the stairs. Have you ever heard of the term cyclopean before? Out of all of the words I've found in the dictionary, it's the one that's most befitting the staircase leading down. It was ancient and massive. The walls were fashioned from smooth, carved, gigantic blocks, placed in perfect patterns. I had to climb down the steps one at a time, and I soon realized I was in way over my head. But I couldn't turn around. I couldn't go back up. This was important. An archaeological marvel. When I finally reached the bottom, I figured I had to be at least 100 feet below the surface. I stood there silently, letting the flashlight illuminate the weird, esoteric architecture unfolding before me. A long narrow hallway lead into the darkness ahead, and after catching my breath I just started walking down it. No fear. No caution. It was like I was meant to be down there. Like I had no choice. Upon the smooth walls I started noticing strange glyphs and symbols, completely unknown to me. I've seen ancient runes and carvings before. Like Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Akkadian and so on, but none of them even came close to resembling these. They looked utterly alien, like the things they depicted had never been seen by human eyes before. After walking for about 10 minutes I came to a cross-section, and had to make a choice. I knew I could easily get lost down there, so I spent a while trying to figure out the best way to mark my path. I really didn't want to touch the walls, so instead I figured I'd just splash some drops of water on the floor at regular intervals, marking where I'd already been. I chose the right path randomly, and kept walking, amazed and awestruck by the sheer size of the place. I don't know how many of those sections I passed, but there had to be at least 5. I chose a random path every time, making sure to remember to splash a decent pond of water where I came from. At some point the hallway started getting smaller and smaller, until I barely fit in it at all. I don't know if you're claustrophobic at all, but I kinda am. More so now. Extremely so now. But still I pushed ahead, easing myself further and further in. And then suddenly I started hearing the noises. There's this sound from my childhood I can never forget. I was at my granddad's farm and he was showing me how to properly slaughter a pig. Only I don't think proper was the correct term. He brought a large axe down on the poor piggy's head, and continued to chop into the soft flesh of the neck until it stopped moving. That sound of the axe working its way deeper and deeper into the flesh. That exact sound echoed through the halls, followed by desperate, animalistic, high-pitched wails. I freaked out. I don't mind admitting it. At that point I finally snapped out of my Indiana Jonesy self, and ran feverishly back the way I came from. The wailing soon died out, but another noise immediately replaced it. I couldn't really hear it at first, because I was busy panicking. It was the sound of naked feet slamming onto the ground. As I reached the crossing I had to slow down to get my bearings. That's when I heard them. That's when I saw it. It was coming towards me unnaturally fast, leaping into the air at erratic intervals. To this day I still have problems describing it. I really don't think our language, any language, has words enough to properly depict that horrible being. It was large, like twice my size, running on 6 elongated limbs. Only they weren't limbs. They were like tentacles, but with bones, bending hideously in crooked angles. Its skin was leathery and pale, almost appearing luminescent in hue. The head I can describe. It was the most human part of it. It had teeth. That was it. But not like fangs or anything. Human teeth. Huge, oversized, human teeth, completely making up the entirety of its head. I was done for, I just knew it. I was dead. I fell to my knees, closing my eyes, crying, shaking, awaiting what I hoped was a swift and painless end. But it never came. Instead, the creature brushed past me furiously, knocking me into wall with immense force, and continued down the hallway. A few moments later I couldn't even hear the sound of its strange limbs. I stumbled to my feet. In my state of utter shock, it took a while to realize what had happened, and even longer to realize it was officially Joey Ver. The flashlight was gone. I found pieces of it on the ground as I scrambled around panic-cally in the pitch blackness, but it was broken beyond repair. I fumbled in my pockets for my phone. It did have a light, but it was pretty shitty. But it had to do. I had to get back as soon as possible. I had to shine the light really close to the ground to see anything, which basically meant I had to resort to crawling. It took me a while, but after some initial struggles I started finding my breadcrumbs. Small pools of water. I followed the trail for what felt like hours, and my knees were bloody and sore by this point. But I persisted on sheer willpower alone. And I was hopeful. I would get out of there. I just knew it. But then I rounded a corner, and my hope turned into utter despair. It was the creature. It was just lying on the ground motionless, surrounded by a deep pool of blood. Dead. And I hadn't been following my breadcrumbs. I had been following the bloody trail of that hideous thing. I collapsed on the ground in tears, fear, exhaustion. I didn't know what to do. How to proceed. I knew there was no way I could find my trail again. I was lost down there in the Cyclopean vault. Doomed to eventually rot and die. No. This wasn't it. I wasn't going to just give up. So I staggered to my feet, and started jogging carefully in whatever direction. I had to find a way. A way back up to the surface. A way back up to the light and the life. I don't know how long I kept this up. I'm guessing several hours. You'd be surprised how much one can endure when put to the test. The human will is truly remarkable. I was sweating, crying, bleeding, almost on the brink of losing consciousness, when I finally bumped into them. The stairs. I laughed. Long and hard. It was a way to release it all, I think, to somehow regain sanity and clear-mindedness. I don't know, I'm no shrink. But I can tell you that I climbed those steps with an intensity and speed I've yet to match. And as I threw that door open, filling my lungs with the fresh, salty, sea air, I've never felt more alive. I carefully climbed out of the abyss, only to realize I had no idea where I was. The boat was nowhere to be seen, and I couldn't for the life of me recognize anything around me. Nothing on the shoreline stood out. No buildings or landmarks. I was lost. And it was getting dark. And I was cold. Was this it? After all that had happened, was I going to freeze to death on a door in the middle of the sea? Well, I can inform you that I didn't. Freeze to death, that is. I still had power on my phone, so was able to call my dad and give him the coordinates from my GPS. He contacted the Coast Guard, who found me grabbing onto the debris of an old, wooden door about 30 minutes later. I was miles away from my boat. Hundreds of miles. I can't even begin to explain how. Or where the door went. I could have swore I was sitting on it when the Coast Guard picked me up, but I was pretty out of it, so I can't really remember. I told them what had happened. I told everyone I met what had happened. No one believed me, of course. How could they? It was just some silly hallucination caused by hypothermia. right? All I know is that if I ever see a door out at sea again, I'm turning the fuck around. I'm still not sure what's down there. What that creature was. How it got there. How that place can even exist. But the thing that scares me the most, the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing I so often revisit in my nightmares is this: given the size of the creature that brushed past me, the creature that ended up dead, one can't even begin to fathom the size, strength, and horror of whatever killed it. There's something alien, monstrous, horrible beyond words down there. And I don't ever want it found.